So, according to OP, he basically insisted on separate finances, right? He wanted to protect his daughter's college fund from his new wife.
Right, which sounds prudent at first.
Exactly. But now the fund is short, the school costs like 65 grand a year, and he suddenly wants his wife to help. The problem, she is using his own rule right back at him.
Oh, man. I mean, that is just the ultimate collision of hyper-defensive financial planning and, well, unexpected reality.
It really is. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are tearing into a super messy, highly contested Reddit post today.
Yeah, and the goal here isn't really to debate whether a teenager deserves college support, right?
Right, no, this is a deep dive into what happens when the rules we build to protect ourselves, the boundaries we set, become the very things that trap us.
That's like a modern morality play.
It totally is. I like to think of it like building a massive fortress to keep people out.
Right.
Only to realize you locked yourself inside right as you're running out of supplies.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The mechanism he built to isolate the risk ended up isolating the rescue.
Exactly. So let's lay out the facts, or at least the timeline, based on what OP claims in his post.
Yeah, the stakeholders are pretty important to understand here.
Definitely. So OP is a 42-year-old man in his second marriage. His current wife is 40, and they have been married for just 2 years.
Okay.
And he has a 17-year-old daughter from a previous marriage. His current wife doesn't have any kids.
Which is a super common blended family dynamic. Millions of people navigate that.
Right. But according to OP, they created a joint account for just household expenses, like, the mortgage, the groceries, things like that.
Sure.
But they kept all their finances strictly separate. And the crucial detail here is that OP explicitly states this arrangement was his idea.
Ah.
Yeah. He says he wanted to make sure his daughter's college fund stayed protected from the second marriage. So OP wanted a financial firewall. But I have to ask, do firewalls in relationships usually work in only one direction? It feels like he was planning for an exit, not a partnership.
Well, what's fascinating here is that setting boundaries based on defensive planning and, let's be honest, distrust bakes a certain culture right into the marriage.
Oh, for sure.
OP essentially created a physical object in the room, a strict contract. He established a precedent that they were basically roommates with shared expenses.
Yeah.
Rather than, a fully integrated financial family.
Which is perfectly fine until the math blows up.
Right. When the market turns against you, you still have to live by the bylaws you wrote.
And the market absolutely turned against him here. Let's look at the crisis, because the 17-year-old daughter is applying to colleges now.
And colleges are not cheap.
No, they are not. According to OP, she was accepted to a school costing around $65,000 a year.
Oh, wow. That is a massive number.
It is massive, and OP says the protected college fund, the one he built the huge wall around, contains about $80,000.
So, that is enough for roughly a year and a quarter, maybe.
Right, 80 grand is a great accomplishment, but against that tuition, it's a huge multi-year funding gap.
Yeah, the reality of the situation just entirely eclipsed his safety net.
So he panics. He executes this massive reversal. OP asks his wife to help cover the costs.
Because they're married.
Right. He says the daughter is technically her stepdaughter now, which implies this deep familial duty. And OP claims his wife earns about $140,000 as a consultant.
Okay, so she has a very strong income.
She does, but she flat out refused to help. She pointed directly to the agreement OP created. Her money stays hers.
Wow. She really held the line.
She did. And here's where it gets really interesting. OP isn't asking for a few $100 for textbooks.
No, not at all.
He's asking for a major rewrite of their marital economics. Why do you think people often mistake their own emergencies for mutual obligations?
Well, I think it comes down to asymmetry. OP frames separation as prudence when he was afraid his wife might touch his daughter's money.
Right, he was just being protective.
Exactly. But once the math blew up, he viewed her adherence to that exact same separation as a complete lack of compassion.
Oh, that is fascinating. Prudence for me, cruelty for you.
You nailed it. He wants the emotional integration of a family now that he needs money,
Right.
after strictly enforcing financial separation to protect his own assets.
And let me tell you, the internet picked up on that hypocrisy immediately. Reddit had absolutely no mercy.
I am not surprised at all.
Yeah, commenters overwhelmingly treat OP's request as a totally self-serving reversal. I want to share the quote that is basically the rhetorical center of the whole thread.
Okay, let's hear it.
It's from commenter AmazingWave4704. Over 1,000 upvotes for this. YTA. Quote, "What's mine is mine, and what's yours is also mine."
Wow. Devastatingly concise.
It really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it?
It highlights that he is not asking for equal partnership. He's asking for unilateral access.
Exactly. And then there's the pure contract argument, too. Commenter OddSeesaw3451 brought this up.
What did they say?
They said, "If the two of you agreed to this 2 years ago, I think it's crazy to expect the other person to fund college."
I mean, that is just the practical reality of agreements. You cannot sign a deal and then throw it out the window the second it becomes inconvenient.
Right, you can't just change the rules mid-game. But the thread also pushed back on the idea that the wife is the only solution here.
Which is a great point because there are always other options.
Tons of them. A commenter named Edie Bags pointed out something so obvious. Quote, "Also, your daughter can go to a cheaper school."
Yes. That is such a crucial piece of the puzzle. The entire conflict is built on a false binary.
Like, commenters are asking about financial aid, student loans, scholarships, or even what the ex-wife, the biological mother, is contributing.
Because deploying any of those other options requires OP to accept the consequences of his own lack of planning.
Yeah, exactly.
It is much easier to point a finger at a partner who makes good money and say, you are the obstacle, rather than telling your kid you can't afford a luxury purchase.
And a $65,000 a year school is absolutely a luxury purchase. Expecting your spouse of 2 years to fund that after walling off your finances.
It's a profound level of entitlement. You cannot demand family integration when you need money if you haven't laid the emotional groundwork.
Which brings us to the collateral damage in all of this, because the conflict expanded way past just the husband and wife.
It always does in these situations, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. According to OP, his ex-wife called his current wife selfish. His sister agrees with him.
Oh boy, so the whole family is involved.
Yep. And his best friend, to his credit, told him he made his bed and has to lie in it.
Well, the best friend has a point there.
But the real tragedy here, the worst part, is that the 17-year-old daughter is deeply hurt by her stepmother's refusal.
Absolutely. The financial gap is just a math problem, but the daughter's hurt feelings, that's a relational injury, and entirely preventable.
The thread saw right through him on this too. Let me read the top comment on the whole post from Pamela9. Almost 1,400 upvotes.
Okay.
Quote, "And this conversation should have been kept from your daughter. You've probably created a rift between your wife and daughter that will take a long time to heal if it ever does."
I completely agree with that commenter. Bringing the child into a financial dispute between adults is incredibly toxic.
And think about the timing of all this. OP points out that he made the request to his wife after the daughter had already been accepted to the school.
Oh, that makes it so much worse.
Right. He waited until she had attached her hopes and dreams to this expensive path. By doing that, he makes his wife look completely cornered.
It is a textbook reactive strategy. Instead of proactive planning, it's crisis management fueled by guilt.
Exactly. If she says no, she's the villain crushing a teenager's dream.
If he genuinely wanted his spouse to be part of the college funding journey, that conversation belonged 2 years ago, during their marriage planning.
Not after the acceptance letters arrived.
Right. You do not wait until the last minute to spring a multi-$100,000 obligation on a partner.
Feels so manipulative. So, what does this all mean for the daughter? OP essentially weaponized his kid's disappointment. Is it fair to say he manufactured this family rift to pressure his wife?
I think that is a very fair assessment. And the tragic irony is that the financial firewall he built ended up becoming a massive emotional wall between his wife and his daughter.
It really is the ultimate bait and switch. So let's distill all this down for the listener. This deep dive wasn't really about tuition.
No, not at all. It's about accountability.
It was about whether you can keep strict, separate finances, enjoying all the autonomy that provides, and then declare an exception only when you are the one who needs a bailout.
The commenters weren't anti-stepchild or anti-education. They were simply demanding that the consequences of the boundary remain with the architect of the boundary.
Exactly. So I want to turn this directly to you, the listener. Take a second to reflect on your own life and your own partnerships.
We all have boundaries we set to protect ourselves.
We do. But when you draw a hard boundary in your life, are you prepared to live with it when the wind changes direction?
That is the real test, isn't it? When the rule you wrote becomes the thing standing between you and the help you desperately need.
Right. Will you accept the consequences of your own design, or will you try to rewrite the rules mid-game and blame everyone else?
It really forces us to deeply examine our true motives for setting these boundaries in the first place.
It really does. And it leaves us with a difficult, lingering question to mull over long after this deep dive ends.
I love a good unresolved tension.
Well, here it is. When a couple agrees to strict boundaries, financial or otherwise, what kinds of emergencies are actually allowed to override that agreement, and who gets to decide?
Wow, that is a tough one.
If every boundary we set has an invisible, unspoken, unless I really need its clause, is it